major protests continue against Donald Trump. We've seen more sustained protests against the first year here of this term than most modern presidents. And yet, at the same time, some of the things that Donald Trump is doing and seizing powers for are still getting backed up by the Supreme Court, which has so many Republican members. The rulings that we're seeing are against this backlash. Massive crowds in D.C., one church ringing its bells in solidarity. Democrats staging a sit-in, meanwhile, in Missouri at the Capitol. At the U.S. Open, Donald Trump attended, the first president to do so in over 20 years, and there was clearly a mixed reaction that included audible boos. That's just one indicator from sports. Meanwhile, on the streets of Chicago, we saw signs against ICE and Trump's crackdown. An aerial view here of the protests about Trump sending in more federal troops. One sign said Trump must go now. You could see that hovering in the crowd. The Democratic governor speaking out.
It's, I believe, a nefarious plan. It's one that's been repeated over and over again by, well, tyrannical dictatorships across history, where you try to incite local population into some mayhem by sending in police or other disruptors, and then claim that there's too much mayhem on the ground, and therefore there must be troops that are sent in.
The Democrat there speaking to Jen Psaki and explaining his view of why this is nefarious. Now, there is legitimate ways to enforce immigration laws. Many countries do that. But whether this is an effort at a kind of scare tactics with ICE agents emboldened will continue under the Supreme Court, which has gone out of its way to help Trump even as he tests new powers. Just today, the Supreme Court said ICE can actually continue roving raids that had been challenged and paused by lower courts. Part of this includes what is basically the targeting of individuals based on appearance, what amounts to a type of racial profiling, no matter how you debate the wording, which usually, I want to tell you, is unconstitutional. In a 6-3 opinion, though, the court said that ICE can continue to do that for now and also allowed Trump to oust an FTC commissioner despite a federal law that prohibits presidents from doing that without cause. You take it together and you actually see something pretty rare, which is sustained street protests against a president who doesn't have any kind of good approval. He's underwater. Most people oppose him and what he's doing, even though he won an election. And yet the court is going out of its way, sometimes on a fast or emergency basis, to help the unpopular president with new powers that, remember, this MAGA court did not extend when there were Democrats in the White House. Here is Trump appointee Barrett discussing why she still doesn't think we're close to a constitutional crisis.
How will we know if we're in a constitutional crisis as American citizens? Like, what would that look like? Because honestly, if you're just a busy person going about your day and you see a lot of headlines that we're in a constitutional crisis, it's like, okay, how will we know that? What would that look like?
Well, look, I think the Constitution is alive and well. And I think that I don't know what a constitutional crisis would look like. I don't think that we are currently in a constitutional crisis.
Justices are known more for their writing than speaking extemporaneously, and that's perfectly fine. As a matter of rhetoric, if you don't know what something looks like, then how would you know if you're in it? And maybe we should all be pretty concerned about how to define the constitutional crisis if it comes so we can face it. It would certainly involve a president openly agitating to stay in office past their constitutional limits, which is something we've heard the president wants to do. We just don't know if he's going to actually try it. Your thoughts on what I mentioned, which is in normal times, the Supreme Court goes slowly. We've seen them when they want to go slow. It helped Donald Trump when they sped certain things up, but we've seen them when they choose to go slow. And so they're jumping in not to leave the lower courts the way they are, but to often override in Trump's favor while there is a big, noticeable populist uprising against these tactics, many of which were not things that he strongly campaigned on.
Yeah, the thing is, Ari, the court can move slow, the court can move quick. They move quick when they feel like it. And many of them, not just because Trump put them on the court, but because they agree with a lot of his authoritarian tendencies, they're stepping in, whether it's through sort of pocket rulings or directly, and making things easier for him to remake the country however it is that he wants. And I think it was really telling in that last interview when Justice Barrett is like, well, I don't know if we're in a constitutional crisis or not. You know, first off, there are many scholars who can explain to her what a constitutional crisis is. But more importantly, if the weatherman can't tell me when it's raining, maybe I shouldn't trust what you have to say. And that's the situation we're in right now, where the court will have any kind of ruling that agrees with Trump.
Let's slow down on that point, because I meant what I said, that if she wasn't ready for the question and didn't have a great answer, that's not the test of a judge. In other words, if she could have a better answer and write it down in a ruling, we'd all say great. But the term constitutional crisis has become coded for, is this all messed up or not? And her interviewer was kind of saying, hey, this isn't that messed up, right? Like, don't believe the hype. It's not a constitutional crisis. And then she says, I don't know, but yeah, it's not. And so, of course, that itself is concerning, because there being guardrails shouldn't be coded for anything other than enforce the guardrail. I don't care what party the president is. If AOC is elected and says that her, quasi-socialist agenda means she can send troops anywhere to do anything, anytime, send the troops into every hedge fund without due process, you know what I'd say then? I'd say that's not how the federal troops work. I don't care what the agenda is.
That would be the kind of answer that we would want, right? That's kind of my point, that if something as basic as constitutional crisis, I don't care if you're writing it down, I don't care if you're reciting it, I don't care if you're spoon-feeding it to a baby. It's the bread and butter of being a Supreme Court justice. And I will say this, as a layman, I always say, I'm not a lawyer, I don't play one on television. But if the Supreme Court can rule that racial profiling and using race is okay to randomly kidnap people off the street, but using race as a factor to determine whether or not someone has overcome specific difficulties in order to get into college, that's where race is a problem. But it's okay to pull people off the street for speaking Spanish and hanging out outside of Home Depot. That, to me, is a crisis.